All right. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever in the world you might be. And welcome to Opera in Conversation, a panel series by Oxford Contemporary Opera, interviewing and having talks with experts in the field of opera from across the globe. Today, we are so delighted to be joined by Mr. Barrie Kosky, who is the Artistic Director of the Komische Oper Berlin. He's been awarded several prizes for his productions, including the Laurence Olivier Award for Castor at Pollus in 2011. Recently, in 2016, he was named Director of the Year by the international magazine Opernwelt. And in 2018, his production of Die Meistersinger with the Bayreuth Festival was announced Production of the Year. So he's definitely a huge name and has given us time to join us today and to ask all of your questions. So without further delay, I'd like to turn it over to the president of our society, Zelina Viliami, to call on Mr. Kosky and start this session. Please free to use the live chat function to ask any questions or comments on the talk. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you very much, Priya. And yeah, let me just extend my welcome to Barrie Kosky. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's truly an honor to speak to you, and I'm really excited about all the things we're going to cover in this conversation.
Oh, thanks, Elena. No, it's a thrill. I'm very happy to be here, and it warms my heart on this very cold, miserable Berlin morning here. So hello to everyone out there in internet land.
Great. So I suppose I kind of wanted to start this discussion with the big question, really, which is essentially, why opera? Why did you choose to go into opera directing?
I actually don't think I chose. I think opera chose me. I think it was like, when they say about houses or dogs, that you don't actually choose them. They're there and you find them. So it wasn't a choice. There were a number of things that I suppose set up the possibility of me, or the likelihood, I should say, of me being an opera. Firstly, and the most important early influence was my Hungarian grandmother, who I've spoken about and written about a lot. She came to Australia in 1935 from a very upper middle class Jewish assimilated Hungarian background, married my Russian grandfather in Paris and came to Australia, and had a miserable time in Australia because she was starved of the culture that she had regularly as a child and as a teenager in Budapest and Europe. And she was an opera freak. She went to the opera when she was 7 for the first time with her father, and she was the one that took me when I was 7 to the opera in Melbourne. And subsequently, I became like her project, and she became like, in a way, my sort of professor. And she had a very particular way of initiating me and in a way, inspiring me in the opera. So it wasn't a case of like, we're going to see an opera tonight, darling. She would tell me 6 months before, she would present to me with a recording of the opera. Then I was told to listen to the opera. Then she would go through the story with me, and then we would read the libretto. And then in a few months later, I would be taken to the production. So this process of musical and textual analysis of a production in a very, very easy sort of childish form happened from when I was 7, and it was Madame Butterfly. So I had listened to Madame Butterfly for 6 months before I'd actually seen a production of Madame Butterfly. And that means that I had this amazing education, so that by the time I was 18, by the time I left school in Melbourne, I'd seen over 200 opera productions in Melbourne and Sydney, and twice overseas. So, and when you're between the ages of 7 and 18, you're a sponge, and everything that happens to you, you are inhaling this, and it's seeping into you, and then at some stage, you squeeze that sponge and it all comes out. So my grandmother was very important, but the other thing happened. Then, of course, then I was doing everything. I was acting when I was at school. I was playing instruments in the school orchestra. I was singing in the school chorus. I was a cliche of a music theatre baby, and only wanted to be involved in theatre, and only wanted to be involved in orchestras, and only wanted to play and sing and act and whatever. And then a teacher at my school in Melbourne when I was 15 said to me, do you want to direct one of the small plays, one of the house plays at school? And I said yes. And then I directed at 15 and knew that that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So it sounds like a sort of magical, sort of cliche of a sort of theatre childhood, but that's what it was. So to answer your question, I never chose it was always there.
Wow, what a really incredible kind of introduction your grandmother gave you. That's so special. Do you think that kind of introduction is necessary for first-time opera goers? So, looking at the libretto, understanding what's happening. Do you think that's a necessary thing to prepare yourself to see a production?
No, I think any relationship with art or with artists is subjective and personal and unique. Therefore, there is no right or wrong way to get involved, to work on projects as an audience or as an artist. There is no one rule and there is no black and white, and everyone has to have their own pathway and way they can go about it. I can only discuss how I came to opera and how I work on opera, but it's in my experience, when I talk to my colleagues and I see, after 30 years of working professionally, what's out there, it's an individual journey. Everyone has to work their own pathway. And of course, you can be interested and inspired and hear how someone else does it. And you can say, that's like me, or that's not like me. But there is no one way. I know lots of people who are brilliant opera conductors and directors who came to opera much, much later. I know lots of audiences who came to opera in their 30s and 40s and 50s. And I know lots of people who didn't like opera then when they was young and only got the bug later. So I don't think there's one way to do it. But however, I do say that we always have to separate, are we talking about the practitioners? Are we talking about the artists who are creating the piece? Or are we talking about the audiences? Because what the audience have to do and what the audience, the ritual of the audience is entirely different from the ritual of creation. So if we're talking about what I think about people who are working in music theatre, and I like to use the word music theatre, not opera. Opera is sort of that thing. Music theatre is what Felsenstein, who founded the Komische Oper in 1947, referred to as music theatre, and that's something very, very different. And I'd like to draw that distinction. But in terms of opera, I think one of the most important things is to that everyone has their own way of entering into the world of music and text. This is also subjective and this is also personal. I have my way, you have your way. I'm sure your listeners have their own way, but what door you open to get into the score and into the textual analysis is also a very subjective thing.
Okay, yeah. So talk to me about your planning process of how does it all happen from the moment that, you've kind of either decided or been offered to do an opera? How then do you develop your ideas, and then how does that feed into the rehearsal room?
Okay, that depends on the piece. If I don't know the piece that well, or I have not seen the piece on stage before, or if I know of the piece but it's not within me because I haven't listened to it for 20 years. This is a very different approach if I'm doing Don Giovanni or Tosca, or if I know the piece very well, or even if I've done the piece before and I'm doing it again. So it depends on the piece, but really the process is similar, and the first process is very easy. That's music. There's only one thing that I do at the beginning, and that is to immerse myself in the music. That means listening to every single recording that I can get. That means thumping away at the piano on the piano score. That means just listening, not reading the text. It's just, what does the music do? What is the architecture of the music? What are the impulses of the music? What colors do I see? What is whirling around, or what are the impulses that the music gives me in my head? And these can be very abstract. This can be a taste, a sensation, an atmosphere. This can be very specific. But the important thing is to understand, what is that music doing? What is the architecture of the piece, firstly, what the music is, because the music in music theatre, the music gives you the architecture. The text does not. The music gives you the architecture. And the second thing is, what is the emotional world that we are dealing here with this music? And then there comes a time where I put the music down and I read the text. And in a lot of operas, the texts are weak and the music is fabulous. In a lot of operas, the text is fantastic, and great texts do not make great operas. Therefore, the text cannot be read and not be analyzed in the same way that you would analyze when you're doing Shakespeare or Molière or Chekhov. It is a completely different analysis, in my experience, when you are doing plays. And that is because sometimes the music contradicts what the text is doing. Sometimes the text is working against the music. Sometimes the text is not important. Sometimes the text is very important. Sometimes the text doesn't give you the answers that you need. But it's important, of course, to analyze that. And so I separate that from the music. And then comes a sort of wonderful period where, over a year or over 2 years, I will meet regularly with my team and begin a discussion. And this discussion does not involve questions like, where should we set the opera? These fundamental flaws in people's understanding of the process of opera productions. What time period? It's a very English obsession. I don't want to, I love your country and whatever, but it's a particularly English. Where are we setting it? Is it Regency? Is it Edwardian? Is it Victorian? Is it contemporary? These questions, I mean, they can be answered later, but that's not really what the piece is asked. The questions is not really, it's a very superficial beginning point for a piece, a discussion about a piece. And so the analysis and the work I do with my team is really just sitting around, having a dialogue about the piece. And I make my team sit down. I choose a recording always. After I've worked on the piece for a while, I say, no, this is the recording that we're going to work with. I always choose one. And we talk about anything. We talk about what we feel, what productions we've seen of the piece. For example, now I'm working on 2 big productions of Don Giovanni and Tosca. I mean, very, very big repertoire pieces. So a lot of the discussion is about what awful versions we've seen and why the piece never works for us when we see it in a theatre, and what's wrong with this, and should we do this, and what's this about, and what the piece means. And you go try and excavate. You try and excavate, because the score is an archaeological, an endless archaeological dig. And the thing about it is, you're never going to get to Tutankhamun's grave. It's never going to reveal itself. It's constantly digging. It's doing a sort of Egyptian archaeological dig with no golden sarcophagus at the end. The production is not the golden sarcophagus, because even when you've done the production, if it's a good opera or music theatre piece, or you've managed to successfully, or what you think is successfully, achieved what you wanted to do successfully, it still means you haven't really ever answer the problems, because I think great art is never answered. It's never answered. It just reveals more questions. That's the joy of it. If you look at a painting or a piece of, or read a piece of poetry or a novel, or you listen to a great piece of music, it's never going to reveal itself totally. That's why it's a great work of art. And so this idea that you've achieved something at the end, of course you've achieved a production, but whether you achieved total enlightenment is another question. So this archaeological dig is important. And then things emerge very organically. It can happen very quickly. Some productions emerge and reveal themselves very, very quickly and effortlessly. Some productions take ages. The Don Giovanni that I'm working on at the moment is hard. Don Giovanni does not reveal itself easily. Tosca reveals itself quite easily, because Puccini's architecture and how Puccini writes music theatre is completely different from Don Giovanni. So it's a very different process depending on each of the pieces and the operas. And then this is the great part. There are two processes I adore in creating music theatre. One is working with a team to challenge each other and go through a sort of panopticon of ideas. Throw things out, you go this direction, you change direction, and this you need time for this. You need a year and a half, 2 years. put it away, bring it out. This process I love. And the other process is the rehearsal process. By the time the show is finished, I'm sort of over it. I don't mean that flippantly, but if the process has been great, by the time we get to the general rehearsal and the premiere, I begin to let the piece go. I begin to give the piece to the singers and the director, and then I'm just doing very objective, critical work. But the period in the rehearsal room, particularly with the long rehearsal periods we get in Germany, unlike the UK or America, and particularly my house where we get a minimum of 8 weeks for each new production, means that this is the reason why I do it. To be in a rehearsal room with a group of wonderful singers working on a wonderful score, trying to discover it for 7-8 hours a day is joy, and that's when the work happens. That's when you find things. I think that the problem with a lot of music theatre processes and a lot of people who think that everything's answered in the model, or everything's answered in a conceptual stage, and that the rehearsals are merely a process to basically confirm what you've already discovered in your model or your work beforehand. This is nonsense. The work you've done beforehand are only direct possibilities of where this could go. And it's only in the rehearsal room, it's only with the singers, and it's only when they articulate the text out of their mouths and they breathe the music and the music comes out of their souls, it's only then that you can begin to really discover. And I find in most cases, 50% of what I thought the piece was about is thrown out. And that's replaced by 50% of new ideas. I usually find it's that sort of ratio. If you've got good people, I mean, it always depends on who's actually doing it. So this process is, look, every director has his or her own way of doing it. All my director friends, when I speak to them about how they do this, we all have completely different processes. And this is very important to realize that if anyone out there, is dreaming to be a director and to work in music theatre, be a sponge, but ultimately you've got to find your own way.
That's such an interesting insight. Yeah, thank you. So what would you say the first thing you do is when you get into the rehearsal room for the very first time, when you have everyone there? What are your main priorities?
Well, the first thing is that I dislike intensely long monologues at the beginning, first day of rehearsal. In fact, my skin crawls when I hear of some of my colleagues who take up to 3 or 4 hours to deliver a sort of opening day monologue. In most cases, particularly now where I actually get to choose my singers with the people I work. So I don't work now in the way that I worked 20 years ago when someone asked me to do a production and the cast was done. And when you're starting off, you just go, yes, I'll do anything. I'll work with anybody. Yes, please. This is not the case now because I don't do anything without knowing the cast. If I know the singers in the cast, then I would have talked to them anyway beforehand. If I don't know the singers, particularly for the main roles, I would have met them before the rehearsals. I never meet the main singers on the first day of rehearsals like a lot of people do, to shake hands and go, hello, I'm Barrie, and they go, hello, I'm Giancarlo or Sophie, and I'm singing, Carmen or the Marschallin or Isolde. I can't work like that. That's a terrible, because you spend the first 10 days, walking on eggshells to try and see how the relationship is going to be. So I tend to have either spoken to or worked with the lead singers before the rehearsal. So there's no need for me to stand up there and deliver a monologue. The other thing I don't want to do is I do not want to say to people at the beginning of a process, here is what the opera is about. Here is what we are going to do. Here is your costume. Here is your character. And basically I am a glorified, highly paid traffic cop who is telling you where to stand and to move. This is not the way I do it, which is why most of my productions, half the costumes are not done until the rehearsals, because it is an appalling thing to say to a singer or an actor, we have decided that your character is this. I mean, most of my productions, the costumes don't articulate what the character is, because that's also, I think, an awful thing when the costume tells you like in sort of kids theatre, what the character is. This is not interesting to me at all. So of course we've done costumes, and of course there's a set, and of course there is a world, but I tend to say, listen, this set, these costumes are just, it's a room, it's a space, it's a place to dream. And I make basically no major decisions. I do no preparation after I have finished working on the show, usually a year before. This means I leave it. I do not sit down before the rehearsals and work out entrances, exits, nothing, absolutely nothing. I arrive on day one. I say, these are the possibilities of this piece. This is what interests me in this piece. This is what I would like to, this is the beginning point, and I hope we can discover something, and I have no idea. And I'm very upfront. I say, I don't know how we're going to do this bit. I don't know how we're going to do this bit. I have a feeling that maybe we go on this bit for this bit. And, you know, a lot of singers freak out. They go, you know, people who know me and work with me are fine with it. But, and then I say to the singers, this is a collaboration. You have to be involved in this. You have to be, of course, I am the ultimate, of course, it's not a democracy here. Ultimately, I have the last word. But in the rehearsal room, I expect and demand from my singers that they say, what about this, Barrie? Why can't I try this, Barrie? Barrie, I'm not happy with what about this? Why don't we try this? Improvisation. There must be an explosion of ideas, and the best idea wins. I don't care if it comes from that person, or that person. The best idea wins. And ultimately, of course, I can say, no, I don't think that's so good, guys. Let's try this. But I try to create, which I think is also the job of a director. The job of the director is not just come up with ideas, and is not just to be this, you know, brilliant genius sitting behind the production table, spouting wisdom. You know, I'm not Yoda. It's not my job, Yoda, to be Yoda. My job is to provide a safety net so that the performers can do anything in the rehearsals, that they cannot be embarrassed to make mistakes, that they cannot be embarrassed when they want to try things out, and they know that I am there and they can fall off the trapeze and they're not going to humiliate themselves. And the difference between if you create an environment in the rehearsal room that is open, inclusive, that involves collaboration, that involves a sharing of ideas, a testing of ideas, the work is 100 times better. 100 times better. And this to me is very, very important. And I create a space where we, you know, the humor is very important. People should be able to laugh. People should be able to feel entirely comfortable with themselves physically. People should feel that anything is possible in that rehearsal. And of course, something then emerges, because the joy of theatre is it's a shamanistic art form. Things emerge out of the performer. The voice is anyway shamanistic. An opera singer's voice is shamanistic. And I think theatre itself is shamanistic. So the idea of me imposing and putting things on is I do the reverse. I draw things out of the performer. I want the performer in a way to not even know that what's actually coming out is their stuff. And this stuff is impossible to explain in words. It's why live performance is so extraordinary. And I have no despair that opera and theatre will survive well into the 21st century, because we breathe, we eat, we shit, we sleep. Therefore, we have a human need to create theatre. So this is, for me, a very important thing. And I think that you know, and I never start with the first scene. Never, ever. I never start with scene one, first page of the score. I jump in somewhere in the middle, or somewhere, an aria or a scene halfway through, and I say, let's start with this. And of course, this freaks a lot of people out, because they go, ugh. I say, well, look, you know the story, you know the music, it doesn't matter where we start. And usually that's because I think that takes the pressure off, that people are going, you know, oh my God, we have to start with the first scene, the first bars, you know, on Monday morning. And this is hard. So I tend to then what I do, so go on with that, is that I work very quickly for the first 2 weeks. I sketch, I throw things in, we work, we say, let's try that, we try that. I want to get through as much as I can in the first 2 weeks, so that there's a sort of what I refer to as a charcoal sketch of the possibilities that we're working on. This is not to say this detailed work, and this is so we're discovering things, but I think it's also very important for the singers and for particularly me to know where we're heading. I can't. I have to be moving forward always to understand, oh, we could be doing this. And then once you've done this charcoal sketch, then you go back. This is why you need rehearsal periods, because I don't work very methodically through each scene and then tick it off and go, that works, that's fine. So sometimes I do that sketch, always, and then I will go back and start working on the detail, and then literally color it in. And then that's the great work. But the good thing is that everyone knows that there's something there. I keep talking about architecture. I talked about the architecture of the score. There's also the architecture of the production. You have to find this architecture is very fluid. It's not a building. It's a four-dimensional sort of, matrix world, but it's still architectural. And I think people need that. They need to know certain positions, certain pinpointing decisions. And it just emerges, a production emerges. If it's a flop or it's a success, you never know. You can have the best people in the room doing the most fabulous opera and it can still not work out. I mean, that shit happens, it's fine. Not everything you do can be successful. Not everything you can do can be the greatest moment of revelation. And for me, it's very important that people just concentrate on the day that they're doing the work. This is the first big part of the rehearsal. Ultimately, after weeks and weeks and weeks, you've got something, and then it becomes the fabulous thing of putting the costumes and putting the light and going into the theatre and all of that, and then putting the orchestra and all of that, which I love still. Putting all those elements together is still very, very exciting, even if it's a small Baroque opera or a big Wagner opera. And that's the process. And I also believe that nothing's ever finished, so it's not finished at the general rehearsal. I have done productions where I have got the cast back into the rehearsal room the day after the general to rework things, because I think you can. And I've even done shows where we're trying out things for the first time at the premiere. In my own house, it's very, very different. This is if I talk about the difference between if I'm a guest director and if I'm working at Covent Garden or Glyndebourne, then my work is really finished after the premiere. But in the Komische Oper, where I'm running it and directing and I have an ensemble, means that the work is entirely different. It means that you keep working after the premiere, and the shows are mostly revived for sometimes up to 10 years. We have shows that are 10 years in repertoire with the same cast, or virtually the same cast that you had 10 years ago. This is a very different thing, because you are creating, and I always try and change things for any of the revivals. But that's another process entirely. Oh, that was a long answer to your very simple question, wasn't it? Oh, well, sorry, I'll shut up.
No, it was a great answer. Thank you for providing us with an insight into kind of everything that goes on, because I feel like sometimes people don't always appreciate just how much work and kind of constant, imagination and reworking things goes actually into making an opera. So I guess I wanted to ask, I mean, you've been directing for a long time now. Do you ever feel the sort of pressure to do something new with a production? You're doing something like Don Giovanni or Tosca. I feel like a lot of modern directors have often tried to put their kind of stamp on it. Do you feel that kind of pressure when directing such a sort of impressive work?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Zelina. I mean, I think I feel no pressure, because I can only do what I do. I mean, everything I do is subjective. Everything I do is my personal response. I make no secret of the fact that it is my personal response. And here we get to a number of very important issues, some of which are complicated by the Anglo-Saxon approach to theatre itself. Any form of performing arts or music is an interpretive art form. It's an interpretive art form, which means that the argument which a lot of people make that Tosca or Don Giovanni, let's use these two operas which we've spoken of, somehow exist as a standalone work, like a painting or a novel, is of course ridiculous and ludicrous, because there are fundamental and obvious, I don't need to go into the obvious differences between a painting and an opera. And this idea of interpretation, which the conductors do and singers do all the time, you only have to listen to the difference between tempi, dynamics, phrasing of every recording of any opera ever made, that it's interpretive. And that's why some performances are 10 minutes longer or 10 minutes shorter. That's why some singers don't do that legato moment there or do a diminuendo on that. No, it's interpretation. And people seem to don't understand, a lot of people don't understand that, in fact, the directing is exactly the same, that Tosca and Don Giovanni do not exist. They're dots. They're dots, they're black and white dots on the page. And that the director has to breathe life into this, and the singers too, but the director has to breathe the life through interpretation. And, you know, directing is a very, very modern concept. I mean, it only started happening towards the end of the 19th century. It only really started to get going in the 20th century in Germany. And then in Russia, and then in France, and then it caught on like wildfire because people understood that there was a new way of dealing with theatre. But, you know, in the past, the director was either the stage manager or sometimes the composer or sometimes the playwright, or the actors or the singers did it. And there was no sense of this Gesamtkunstwerk. This was a very modern, the idea of directing is a very modern concept. And started basically, and also really in a big way in Berlin with Max Reinhardt and Piscator, and then spread across Europe. But I think it's very important for people to realize that there are lots of charlatans and dilettantes out there, but charlatans and dilettantes exist everywhere. They exist in the restaurant scene. They exist in literature. They exist in journalism. In every creative field, whether it's food or hairdressing or music theatre, there are people that are good, and there are lots of people that aren't good and really should be doing it. And that's fine. That's going to happen. I'm not saying no names, but I mean that happens. And there are lots of people that are very good, and I think that the idea that a director is somehow destroying a work, the language that's used about directors often is fascinating, because it usually is about destroying. Destroying the music, not hearing the music. Now, I can tell you with 100% absolute 100% security that I would know an opera better than any critic if I've been working on it for a few years. I know the score inside out better than any critic in a newspaper. And I would know the score, and I don't mean this arrogantly, I would know the score and the text better than 99% of the audience. That's not an issue, but I just think it's very important, and any director should be in that position. So an audience member or someone can have naturally a subjective, anyone's entitled to their opinion. Anyone can write anything they want about my production. Anyone can sit in the audience going, I hate that, Barry. It's awful. They are entitled to their opinion, and I must accept that. It's fine. You want the majority of people not to feel that, but it's fine. I don't have a problem, because if you want to put your work out there in public and say, I want an audience, you have to expect there are people who are not going to understand it and people who are not going to like it. This is fine. What I do not like to be told, as a musician myself and someone who takes my work very seriously, is that I don't understand the piece, or that I haven't heard the piece, or I'm destroying the piece. And this is basically because I think that people confuse opera with religion. And there is, of course, a huge connection between the ritual of theatre and the ritual of religion, but they approach Tosca or Don Giovanni in the same way you would approach an altar, that you are there to genuflect in front of this masterpiece. And it's complete nonsense. There's no genuflection here. If anything, I want to rip it apart and then put it back together, because that's the only way you can work on a piece of theatre or a piece of music theatre, is to actually completely take it away and then construct it again with your cast and with your ideas. But this wonderful thing, and I think what's also important to say is that there'll always be another production of Tosca. I'm not directing the last production of Tosca that will ever be. I'm just directing Tosca in Amsterdam next year, and that will be played for 10 performances, and people will come and see it, and then there'll be other Toscas around too. I mean, sometimes the level of hysteria that revolves around music theatre is sometimes very distasteful. And now, my Tosca may or may not be a success, who knows? But I take it very seriously, the work that I do. And for me, it's very important to say that you must trust your instincts in your interpretative work. And the worst thing to do is to begin to say, we have to do this because everyone else has done that. I talked about before that I'm very aware, I've seen lots of productions of Tosca, but I'm not saying, oh my goodness me, they did this, they did that, I can't do this, everything must be new. Sometimes the ideas are new, sometimes the ideas are not new. Everyone's stealing from everyone anyway, consciously or unconsciously. But I think that if your starting point is what everyone else is doing or what everyone else has done, this is dangerous. Your starting point must be, what do I feel? How do I feel this should go on the stage? And so therefore, I'm really not aware anymore of the pressure, to answer your question, to go back to your question anyway, is the pressure of doing something new doesn't even enter into my creative process. It's essentially for me the next project, and that's all I think about.
Yeah, I completely respect what you've just said there. I think it is a really important aspect of directing. And I suppose I wanted to ask you, I mean, I think in an interview you once said that you enjoy playing with both the objectivity and the subjectivity of your audiences. So I was wondering how much audience consideration feeds into your work, especially when planning a production and then obviously rehearsing with the singers.
Yeah, I'm someone that loves audiences. I mean, my job is not to outrage and provoke. Now, my productions, people can be annoyed by them, or they can feel that I'm provoking. But in fact, that's actually not what I'm doing. That would be dilettantish to do that. And it's not what I'm doing. I'm not there to provoke the audience. I'm there to delight and seduce and intrigue the audience. It's the opposite. But I think the audience have a job to do. When you buy a ticket to see a piece of music theatre or theatre, there are two pathways you can go. You can either I'm buying this ticket to confirm everything that I know or think about this piece, and if I don't see that on the stage, then I'm gonna say that's wrong, bad. But unfortunately very prevalent in the UK. Or the other approach is I'm buying this ticket because I can't wait to see what these artists are going to do with this piece that I love. And maybe it will be revealed new things and new ideas of this piece that I thought that I knew very well. I can't wait to go on the magic journey. Now, the audiences are divided, I think, into these two pathways. And, for me, I think it's very important always to keep, as a director, an objectivity. You must be able to be completely subjective and instinctive, and then at certain moments step back and put yourself, which is quite hard to do, into an objective position, saying, if I was watching this for the first time, if I was seeing this for the first time, what would I think? What would be my reaction? Would I understand it? Would I find it funny? Would I find it horrifying? Is it going to have the right emotional response? Now, you can do that up to a particular period by yourself. Then you've involved the team, and you turn around and say to people, does this work? Is this good? Is this powerful? Is this funny? I mean, you have to involve other people in that process. And then I find always this wonderful thing, particularly with operetta and particularly with comedy. You have to, in the end rehearsals, watch what the people who are sitting in the theatre are watching for the last 10 days of rehearsals and how the reactions. I'm always very interested in watching what the costume department, or are the makeup people laughing, or are the makeup people sitting there horrified at that right moment. I'm very interested what the Fachmenschen, I sometimes think of Germany, what the people involved in the piece are doing, or how they're reacting. But ultimately, I don't know. You can get to the premiere and this is the other thing about theatre generally. The premiere, we all know, is the worst show. I mean, I've never been involved in any production in 30 years where that premiere is anything but the most difficult show. and which I wonder why we haven't persuaded critics to wait till the third or the fourth production, or when we're recording things or whatever, because the pressure is always too much. And I have never done a production where the first show is the best show ever. I've done productions where it's been good. I've also done productions where the first night has been really not good because of the magic of the audience and the chemistry or whatever it is. But to me, the entire ritual of theatre, which started in ancient Greece, is of this amazing dialogue between a group of artists and a group of people watching, a voyeurism. And this idea of a group of people pretending, and another group of people watching and being seduced by this pretense is in the fundamental DNA of theatre and music theatre. And it's very, very important. And I'm not one of these directors I couldn't give a fuck what the audience think. I'm doing my work, and if they don't understand it, no, I never think like that. I never, ever think like that. I'm disappointed when people don't understand or like something that I've done. I accept it. And I assume there's always going to be people that don't like it. Because I'm exactly the same. There are films I don't like. There are painters I don't like. There are novels I don't like. I can like that writer, but then they write a new book and I don't like the new book. It's fine. But I am very I'm consciously aware of that thing called the audience. What I am aware of too is that I cannot control what they think and what they feel. And no one can. That's also something that you have to let go. You can manipulate an audience into going in a certain direction, but even then, 1,000, 2,000 people sitting there in the dark, that's 1,000, 2,000 separate opinions and experiences. And some people are thinking about the laundry when they're watching one of my productions. Some people are thinking about how this is torture, when will it end? Some people are dreaming about what they're going to eat later after the opera or in the interval. And some people are completely transfixed and transformed by it. That's the nature of the beast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your insights about that. So I guess turning to your general roles, both as a director and an artistic director of an opera house, obviously 2020 has been, a year like no other, partly because of, the coronavirus pandemic and then other discussions about race. So I wanted to ask you what you think will be happening in terms of the future of live performance, because right now it seems so uncertain because of the pandemic. But how do you think that the future of live performance will be affected by COVID-19?
Very simple. Just look at what happened to Shakespeare. He had to shut the Globe and the theatre down 3 times, I think, in his lifetime. Had to leave London. I believe it's 3 times. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's 3 times. The theatre shut down. The brothels shut down. I always love the fact that the theatre and the brothels happened to work at the same. In Germany last week, when they shut the theatres, bordellos und theater. We were even after the bordellos, and of course, a lot of the German cultural scene were completely outraged that theatre was put with brothels. And I have to say to my colleagues, theatre has always been put with brothels from ancient Greek theatre till now. I see no problem with it. So Shakespeare. So there was, plague in England in Shakespeare's time. London theatres were shut down a lot. The actors had to leave. The theatre came back. Shakespeare wrote King Lear. So this idea that we are going through a terrible crisis, a health crisis, a financial crisis, a sort of crisis of the soul, and things are shut down, things are under threat. I don't make light of people's difficulties and struggles at all, but the theatre will survive. It's survived before. It's survived world wars. It survived many years of plague and pestilence, and will survive. The idea that we're going to come out of this hopefully sometimes next year and going to survey a landscape of total destruction is nonsense, is complete nonsense. It sounds good now, like it's from an apocalyptic Hollywood film. And people who are sitting in the middle of this, in a not privileged position like we are in Germany, where we're still being paid because we are nearly 100% subsidized by the German government. And so no one who is under contract and not freelance is suffering financially. This is a position of enormous privilege and luxury. And I know that all my English friends and American friends and Australian friends are freelance directors and designers and singers and conductors and have no work. This I worry about. And then when you're sitting in the middle of it, you go, fuck, how is this gonna end? And what's this gonna happen? And am I gonna have to change profession? I mean, people are really struggling with this. Have I got enough money to feed my family in 3 months' time? How am I going to survive? These fundamental issues are very, very, very prevalent. I think that's what we should concentrate now. The future of the art form, what will happen post-COVID is a luxury that I don't think we should even worry about now. I think we should solve the health crisis first and make sure people have got food on the table and can survive. And then let's worry about what will be the direction. Because I think to sit in the middle of the Germans are obsessed with this. There are a number of articles that are about, is this a chance to change things? Is this a chance to maybe restructure the whole of the cultural landscape? I think that's obscene. In the middle of a crisis where people are losing jobs and no one knows when the theatres will open, to suddenly be talking about this as a chance for change is grotesque and amoral, I think. And if there's going to be change, and if they're good or bad, this will emerge in the aftermath of the health crisis, and we don't know what that's going to be. We don't know what shape or form it's going to be. But if that's what people are thinking about now, then really I think their priorities are completely wrong. I'm thinking about in my opera house is that how am I going to make sure that my 450 workers in the theatre and singers and people have things to do and are nourished, because I have the privilege of still being able to rehearse, and the joy of performing in front of an audience and making sure that we survive through this turbulence. But my job is not to think, you know what, maybe this is the opportunity where we completely change everything. You know, I mean, maybe things will be changed and maybe they'll have to change. But I think that's something that needs to happen in the next chapter. And I think at the moment now, it's just a sense of survival to get through this horrendous time, to make sure that the thing is there at the end. But apocalyptic day of judgment, end of time, end of theatre as we know it, the end of culture, I don't buy into that. I do not buy into that. I buy that it's going to be difficult and complex and who knows what's going to happen, but it solves no problems and helps nobody to say that it's all over, it's going to be terrible. And it's not, I mean, we're not dealing with the bubonic plague. We are dealing with a pandemic that we believe will eventually, through vaccine and treatment, be able to be solved. I mean, thank goodness it's not Ebola. And thank goodness it's not the bubonic plague. So, you know, I think that whatever that's going to happen next year, we don't know exactly when and how, the theatres will come back like they did in Shakespeare's time. I'm not saying that COVID is exactly like it was in 17th century England, but you know, we can look at history to learn and see. And as long as there are people on the planet, there will be culture. And as long as there is culture, there'll be theatre. It's as simple as that. I mean, I don't want to be flippant about it, but it's as simple as that.
No, I'm really glad to hear that you have an optimistic, viewpoint.
Well, I have to, because I believe that, firstly. And at 53 years of age, it's what I believe. And also, I don't want to, I mean, what is it if I, as a leader and an intendant and experienced director, say to your generation, it's all fucked, it's all over. I'm sorry. I mean, what sort of responsibility is that? I think it's up to the people in the positions of power to remember that one of the great things about theatre and music theatre is you pass torches on, you pass it on to the next generation. You give people the opportunity to work and to create, and you want to always make sure that young artists are always singing and directing and designing in theatre, and through the tradition of theatre has this amazing tradition, this amazing family tradition of being a family. And it's up to the artistic leaders of, if it's an orchestra or a theatre or an opera house or a museum, to remember that, you know, you're not paid to be miserable. You're not paid taxpayers' money to sit there and be miserable and pessimistic. That's not leadership. And certainly when I think about my responsibility as an intendant, different from an artist. If I'm going to be the artist, then I will shut the door and I will put on a very, very, very sad piece of Schumann music and have a glass of red wine and think, oh dear, what's all this about? But as an intendant, I can't do that. It's irresponsible. My job is to say to people, we will get through this. And I do believe it. I do believe it. It's not, in a way, I don't think it's even optimism. I think it's pragmatic.
Yeah, I'm, again, glad to hear that you have that perspective. I think the other thing I wanted to ask you is just, again, as I said, this year has been like no other. And I think that's partly because, such awareness has been given to movements like Black Lives Matter. And I hope that, many people have been exploring their own encounters with, with racism. And I was just wondering, do you think that opera has a race problem? And if so, what steps do you think we should take to solve it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's fascinating that at the same time, these things don't happen by accident. Trump's America, Brexit, pandemic, all of that stuff is then matched by an explosion of other issues. It's, a few years ago, the whole hashtag Me Too and the whole look at sort of patriarchal structures, which have been a discussion point for over 100 years in European culture, suddenly exploded in a very good way, and then followed by a discussion about race, about identity, about assimilation. What I find interesting is that these have been themes that have been prevalent in art and theatre and arts for ages. I mean, this is not new to us. Maybe it's new to other people. Working together, respecting other people's opinions is something that really should happen in any theatre and music theatre environment. This is not something we have to learn or change. Of course, there are and I do believe there are systematic problems with casting, with allowing other voices. We must have more female directors and female conductors in the music theatre. I mean, it's just, it's something that can't just be switched on like that. And I don't believe, we don't set up a quota system saying we must have 50%, but we must do more. I mean, we try and do more. I try and make sure that there's at least, if there are 8 productions, that at least 3 or 4 are directed by women, not because they're women, because they're good. But I think we have to start somewhere. So you have to say, yes, they are women, because hopefully then in 20 years' time, you don't have this discussion. It's natural and normal. I think the conductor thing is very important. I think this idea that only men can conduct is deeply ingrained in the tradition of music theatre. And that has to change. And there are spectacular young women conductors around. And it's not a matter of being, are they as better or as good as? I don't think that's the issue. I think that becomes the sort of discussion point, and I think it's problematic. They're just good artists and they should have the gig. But we have to be conscious about that. You have to be, as an artistic leader, you have to say, come on, this has to change now. I don't think any artist wants to get a job because of their sex. I think every artist wants to get a job because of they're good at that job or they are the right person for that job. However, in this transition time where we are struggling with this very male-dominated, very white, heterosexual mainstream, sometimes you have to state the bleeding obvious, and sometimes you have to actually go, no, well, we need to get a female director for this piece because I think it's about time, and sometimes you have to be as banal and as obvious as that. And then hopefully then it becomes natural, and then you open up the possibilities. It's exactly the same thing with racial casting. Although I must say, to give the opera world, there are problems, but opera is an international art form. There are many Black singers who work on the stages. There are many Asian singers who work on the stages. They need more opportunities, but a voice is a voice. So I don't cast a singer because they are of the color of their skin. I cast a singer because that soprano is right for that role. However, if I say, I think it's very important in this production that the people you see on stage are not all white, northern-looking people. I mean, I have this struggle in Germany. It's very hard here because the assimilation is, or what you see on the streets is not what you see on the streets of London or New York or Paris. Germany is quite a monoculture still. So you have to really struggle. Now, do I achieve that in every production? No. But if I say, you know, I think it's very important that there is on stage, I'm seeing faces that I see on the street, then that's the way you approach it. You don't approach it saying, oh, I must have 4 black singers if there are 8 roles here. I mean, this is dangerous territory in an artistic world. The discussion then goes into a very interesting direction when you talk about something like Othello. Then it becomes very, because I think you have to be case to case. I'm not a believer in doctrine or dogma when it comes to arts. I think it's very dangerous. I think you have to have an understanding and appreciation and an empathy, but then you have to look at each production and each cast. So Othello is very interesting. I love Othello at the opera. I've never done it. I find it very difficult. If I was to direct Othello now, I would only want a black tenor to sing it, personally, if I was directing it. Because I think it's fundamental to the character and the narrative of both Shakespeare and Verdi and Boito. And there are black tenors who can sing it. So there would be no question for me if I was doing Othello. Does this mean that a non-black white tenor can never sing Othello? Now, I believe they can. What they can't do is black up in blackface. But there is no way that we can forbid a white tenor from singing Othello. I think the production will be strange. I don't quite know what you'll be saying in the production, but can Jonas Kaufmann continue to sing Othello? Of course he can. What he can't do is suntan his face or present himself in any way that refers to the history of minstrelling and blackface. It's over. That is unacceptable. In the same way that no singer can make their eyes Asian if they're playing Madame Butterfly. Can a Russian soprano sing Madame Butterfly? Yes. Can a Russian soprano sing Madame Butterfly in a kimono? Yes. Can a Russian soprano make her eyes to appear like the cliche of Asian beauty? No, it's over. It's over. And I think you have to separate these things. And it's not being politically correct, it's just being respectful and understanding history. So I think it's a personal thing. There are many, I think it's very dangerous to say the only people who can sing Othello are black tenors. I think most black tenors would not want that to be the case, because then you have to do the other way and say, well, you know, there are other roles that, you know, very clearly sung by, you know, an Aryan Nordic goddess. So, you know, you don't want that to be the case, you know. So I don't think it's tricky. I think people are making, I think people just have to be sensible and sensitive. And it's not going to change overnight. People have to be patient too. I think we've lost patience. You know, these issues of race, of sexual identity, of voices being heard, is something that is very important and fundamental to how to live and respect people in the 21st century in democratic societies. But let's be also patient, and also don't demonize people that don't understand it or have made mistakes. I think this is terrible when people point the finger and say, you should never work, you can't do that, you are evil, you are bad. I mean, this is not, change does not come about like that. You have to seduce, communicate, let people understand. For an old 80-year-old opera lover, when you say the days are over where the singer can put blackface on to play, to tell you have to take the time to explain how the world's changed. They're not instantly going to understand that. And I think this is very, very important. And we must make sure that in our fundamental belief that things have to change, and I'm not saying, and there's nothing utopian about theatre or opera or music theatre at all. I'm not saying it's this magical, wonderful place where everything is perfect. I mean, some directors behave appallingly and should be told that some directors take advantage of young singers in ways that are unacceptable, and they should be called out. And there are certain practices that have to be changed now and have to be relooked, and there are doors that have to be opened. But I think through the international, I mean, opera and music theatre is very international art forms. That it's going to be much easier to do that in an opera than in theatre. And I think there is constructive change happening. Is it happening fast enough? Probably not. Will there be obstacles in the way? Yes. But I think if we fast forward to 20 years' time, we'll see the fruits of the work now. Yet again, I remain optimistic. I know there's a lot of work to be done about it, but I think it's also up for the intendants and the directors to do that, to make those decisions. You know, for example, let me give you an example. We were meant to do a new production of Katja Kabanova, and that's been postponed. And I said, listen, this work is this character Katja is such an extraordinary character. I think that in a new production of Katja, what I would be interested in is certainly having a female director directed. I would be also very interested in having a female conductor conducted. I thought it's then, you know, it's, to me, Katja, the director and the conductor. To have that, I think, is very interesting. Then I would take a piece that is very, very, you know, aggressive, or has sort of, you know, a piece. I think if I was asking someone to do Don Giovanni, I would absolutely, my first choice would be to get a female director, because I think we've seen enough male visions of the piece. I'd be interested to see how a female director views those male characters and that sense of masculinity, and also the women, how a female director would view those women in that piece. That's not to say that I shouldn't be allowed to do Don Giovanni. I'm just saying that if I was, as an intendant, planning a new production of Don Giovanni, I would, same with Carmen, all the problem pieces. We've seen enough male visions of them. And that's to say we can't have male directors doing it, but those pieces, I think I'd be much more interested in seeing what a young or old female, I don't care about the age of the director, but the perspective from a different perspective. It's important, I think.
Certainly, yeah. Thank you very much for that answer. You definitely given us a lot to think about. We just have time for a few questions from our audience. So I just want to begin with a question which says, your recent Meistersinger production is startling in its presentation of Beckmesser, in particular with the blown up Jewish caricature, which, filling the entire stage, ends Act 2. So the question is, what responsibilities does a modern director have in confronting Wagner's anti-Semitism today?
Well, I have a responsibility because I'm Jewish. So I have a responsibility. I don't think every director has a responsibility to confront Wagner's anti-Semitism if it doesn't register with them or doesn't interest them. I think in the case of Wagner, we are dealing with one of the most complicated, maybe the most complicated, ambiguous, and contradictory personality in music theatre. The man who changed the nature of music theatre, and whose influence we are still dealing with today. However, I would say that I, as a Jewish director, cannot ignore these themes, cannot ignore the contradictions in the music and the text of many of his pieces, and in particular with Alberich or Mime or Beckmesser, all three who I believe to be absolute anti-Semitic presentations of his anti-Semitism as characters. There's always a very interesting from the Wagner's anti-Semite people. The argument will be, if Wagner wanted to put Jews on stage, he would have made them Jewish. And you go, well, that's firstly not how art functions. And Wagner was very clever. He was dog whistling to his audience. I mean, all of those characters are sending out dog whistles to his German audience at the time. And so it was very clear to me that that I would develop Meistersingers and would have to deal with all of that. Was Wagner responsible for Hitler? No. Was Wagner responsible for the Holocaust? No. Was Wagner an anti-Semite? Yes. Is Wagner's anti-Semitism, are his pieces drenched in that? Yes. Is Wagner a genius? Yes. Should we perform Wagner? Yes. Do I like Wagner? Sometimes. Do I have a problematic relationship doing it? Yes. Do I want to do more Wagner? Yes.
There we go. One last question we have, which is, which part of the process of directing opera do you find the most difficult, and what advice would you give young directors in dealing with these challenges?
Oh, got a few hours. I think the most, I wouldn't say difficulty, I don't like using that word, a challenge. One of the challenges in a director, it doesn't matter if the piece has 4 singers or 10 singers or 200, or has a big chorus. One of the challenges is juggling different personalities and different ways of communicating with the artists that you are working with. That means that you cannot speak to everyone in the same way. You can't speak to the chorus in the same way that you would speak to the singer who is singing the little role here, who would see to the tenor who's having trouble because he's not such a great actor, but you have to encourage him and you have to find a way that makes it work. And then the soprano who is brilliant and she can be left alone and you can just say very, very simple things. I mean, you have to develop an incredibly complicated system of communication where you know what that person needs and how you have to communicate that to that person. And that is actually exhausting because in a way it's being a psychiatrist. It's like having a psychiatry session with multiple people on the couch who you have to speak to individually. And this is part of the job, but it's the thing that I find exhausting, and you have to be very conscious of that and have to train that. That to me is one of the biggest challenges that I think young directors really have to learn, is that you have to smell virtually straight away, how do I talk to that singer? What does that singer, how will that singer, some singers want conceptual discussions. Some singers want very simple, practical, faster, slower, move quicker, pick it up there. Some singers are happy to be left alone. Some singers can't deal with anything. Some singers are incompetent. And you've suddenly got yourself in a rehearsal room where you go, this singer can't act. This singer doesn't know what they're doing. What do I do? Well, if it gets really bad, he or she had to be replaced if you can. But the other thing is then you have a duty to find a way to make it work. And that involves then a different approach than you would for the other singer. And then the chorus is a whole different. And I think people make the mistake when they're working in opera that there's one way of communicating everyone and everyone should understand me. And if you don't understand me, that's your problem. That's not going to work at all. If someone doesn't understand what I want, then it's my job to make them understand and take the time to make them understand. I really hate it when I hear directors getting frustrated because they don't understand what I want. Then make them understand, make it clearer.
Yeah. That's a great note to end on. Barrie Kosky, thank you very much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure talking to you and hearing about your directorial process and your insights into the industry.
Yeah, and thank you very much. And I wish everyone well and stay safe. And I really look forward to, in the post-corona world, to come back to the UK and direct some more shows because I love working in Britain. So thank you.
I'm just going to hand over to Priya, who will give a bit more information about our upcoming talks. But the next one is with Judith Weir on the 18th of November. Priya, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Selena. Thank you, Barrie. That was a really productive and fascinating hour, and I'm sure all our viewers will agree. So thank you so much for giving us your time. As Selena said, we have Judith Weir on the 18th of November, and then on the 25th of November, we have Oliver Mears joining us. All our information can be found on our website, which is at www.oxfordcontemporaryopera.com. In the description to this video, you can find links to all our social media accounts as well and more details. Please do subscribe to our channel and like this video to be in the loop with all our future projects. But aside from that, have a lovely day or a lovely evening wherever you are, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you so much, Barrie. Thank you so much, Selena. And with that, we finish.